Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine stepping out your door and, well, the sun hasn't risen for months.
Right. Or picturing a town where buildings just stand there like frozen ghosts from another time, perfectly preserved by that intense cold.
And, maybe sharing your neighborhood with polar bears. That's actually life in some form in the high Arctic. It's one of the planet's most challenging places for humans.
Yeah, it pushes back hard. You've got the extreme cold, months of darkness, or conversely, endless daylight, permafrost locking the ground tight.
And not much in the way of easy resources.
Exactly. But somehow, people are there. And they're not just, barely surviving, they're actually building lives.
So today we're doing a deep dive into this stack of sources. You've shared articles, research notes, all exploring how humans have actually managed this. We're looking at three really distinct northern settlements.
That's right. We have Alert in Canada,
Yeah.
and then Pyramiden and Longyearbyen, both in Norway, on Svalbard.
Our mission here, to really dig out the important insights, find those surprising stories, and just understand the wildly different reasons people ended up there and how they make it work right at the top of the world.
What does it really take to make a home when nature is constantly, relentlessly testing you?
Let's find out. We're starting by looking at these three sort of models.
Yeah, first Alert in Canada. It's basically a strategic military and research outpost. Very specific purpose.
Then we'll jump over to Pyramid in Norway, that abandoned Soviet mining town, now a
Yeah.
kind of haunting time capsule with a bit of tourism.
A fragile return, yeah. And finally, Longyearbyen, also Norway. It started as a mining town too, but it's actively transforming, really becoming this hub for research and tourism. It's facing huge challenges, but also opportunities.
So each one gives us a completely different angle on why you'd be there and how you'd possibly manage it.
Exactly.
Okay, let's start with Alert, Canada. This place is officially the world's northernmost permanently inhabited settlement. It's way up on Ellesmere Island in Nunavut.
Astonishingly far north. Only 817 kilometers from the North Pole. Just think about that.
So how on earth did anyone end up putting a base there?
Well, its story kicks off in the early 1950s. It was part of something called the Joint Arctic Weather Station System, JJWS. So initially, the focus was all about gathering crucial scientific data, weather data.
But that changed pretty quickly, didn't it? The purpose shifted.
It did, yeah. By 1958, it had evolved, became a signals intelligence unit under the Canadian Army, the Alert Wireless Station.
Ah, Cold War era.
Precisely. That gave it major strategic military importance back then.
And today? What's its role now?
Still vital. It maintains critical signals, intelligence facilities, supporting military operations. It also provides things like geolocation and high-frequency direction finding.
Which is basically helping pinpoint radio signals.
Exactly. Super important for search and rescue missions in that vast region. Plus, it supports researchers from Environment and Climate Change Canada. They're gathering data on climate change, air quality.
So the core reason Alert exists, it was never really about building a town in the traditional sense, was it?
Not at all. It's fundamentally about asserting Canada's sovereignty up there,
Hmm.
about national security, and specific research goals. People aren't choosing to move there, they're assigned there for work.
And that shapes the whole population dynamic.
Completely. It's entirely transient. You've got a rotating group of Canadian Armed Forces personnel, the CAF plus Department of National Defense employees, those ECCCC researchers, and various contractors.
And they're only there for short stints.
Typically, yeah. Temporary tours, usually about 3 to 6 months. You're deployed for a specific job. Military signals intelligence, atmospheric monitoring, or essential support role like Polar Bear Watch.
Hold on. Polar Bear Watch is an actual job title.
Apparently so.
That really tells you everything about the environment they're dealing with.
It really does. And we're talking small numbers, fewer than 200 people usually.
Yeah.
This isn't a place you settle down with your family. It functions as a highly specialized, self-contained facility focused purely on its mission, readiness.
And there's even a medal for serving there.
Yeah, the Special Service Medal for military personnel. It underlines that it's a posting, a tour of duty, not a place to, put down roots.
Okay, let's talk about that environment. It sounds incredibly harsh. The sources say it's technically a desert.
That's right. Surprisingly little precipitation, maybe half an inch a year, mostly rain in July and August. But snow can fall any month. And the cold, it's just brutal.
Plus those light cycles. Months of total darkness, months of constant daylight.
Continuous daylight, April through September, and then no direct sunlight at all from October to March. The transitions are apparently quite rapid, too.
So how is survival even possible in a place like that?
It hinges entirely on purpose-built, incredibly robust facilities designed to withstand everything. And because it's so incredibly remote, 800 kilometers from the nearest community, over 4,000 from Ottawa.
Wow.
Literally everything has to be imported. All the food, fuel, building materials, everything needed for life is flown or shipped in.
Technology must be absolutely key.
Essential. Advanced communication is critical. They actually operate on Ottawa time for logistics. And of course, the tech for their main signals intelligence work is sophisticated. And yes, those polar bears are a constant factor, requiring strict monitoring and safety protocols.
So the main takeaway for Alert is this complete dependence on external support.
Absolutely. Its viability rests completely on advanced tech, continuous logistical supply lines from the south, and central management. It's a total reliance on external lifelines.
Which is a massive contrast to how people traditionally lived in the Arctic.
Night and day. Traditional survival relied entirely on intimate knowledge of the local environment and resources. This modern model is something else entirely.
And we should touch on the indigenous context here, even though Alert itself is modern.
Definitely. Alert was only set up in the 1950s, but Ellesmere Island itself has this incredibly deep indigenous history going back thousands of years.
Peoples like the Pre-Thule, the Dorset, and then the Thule people, who are ancestors of modern Inuit.
Exactly. They lived on the island around 1,000 years ago. Master adapters, highly specialized hunting for seals, muskoxen, other wildlife. There's archaeological evidence all over stone tools, carvings showing how long they were there.
But that presence ended centuries ago.
Yes, the island was eventually abandoned by the Inuit, likely during the climate shift known as the Little Ice Age, long before Alert was conceived.
So Alert isn't a continuation of that history. It's something entirely new.
A complete discontinuity. A technologically driven, strategically motivated establishment. And it's important, too, to remember the broader context of non-Indigenous presence in the Canadian Arctic.
Right, including difficult histories like forced relocations.
Exactly. The Canadian government acknowledges that dark chapter. While it's not directly tied to Alert's founding, it underscores the complex history of external powers in the North. Inuit communities today still maintain deep cultural connections to these lands, including Ellesmere Island.
Okay, so Alert paints one picture. Strategic necessity, high tech, total external reliance. Let's pivot dramatically now to Pyramiden in Norway. It's in the Svalbard archipelago.
Yes, and the sources often call it a haunting testament to an abandoned Soviet experiment. It really has that feel.
Founded by Sweden originally.
Yeah, back in 1910. Named after a pyramid-shaped mountain nearby. But then it was sold to the Soviet Union in 1927. A state-owned company called Trust Arktikugol acquired it in the 1930s.
He rebuilt it after WWII.
Pretty efficiently. Mining operations kicked off in 1948, but this wasn't just about digging coal, was it? There was a bigger idea.
Definitely not. It seems this was a deliberate, planned attempt to build an ideal Soviet society, right there in the high Arctic.
They poured resources into it. Extensive social amenities, a petrol station, greenhouse, even a farm, school, kindergarten, hotel, restaurant, a huge culture center with a theater, a library reportedly holding 50,000 titles, art, and music studios.
A sports complex, a 24-hour canteen. And wasn't there something about Lenin?
Yes. The northernmost monument to Lenin. And, get this, the northernmost indoor swimming pool. They were clearly trying to make life there more than just work, make it vibrant.
The philosophy mentioned in the sources is interesting, that loyalty and collectivism fit the Arctic spirit of fellowship.
Right. And it worked. For a time. At its peak in the 1980s, over 1,000 people lived there, mostly Ukrainian miners and staff. Apparently, getting a job there was quite popular, decent wages, 2-year contracts.
And it sounds like it was a genuinely lively place.
Very much so. One source mentioned something like 90% of residents were involved in cultural or sports activities. They even made a serious attempt at self-sufficiency.
With a greenhouse.
A big one, built in 1985, trying to produce local milk, meat, eggs, vegetables to supplement the food shipments, and apparently from 1958 onwards, food was actually free for residents.
Wow, free food. That really underscores the utopian ideal they were aiming for. Not just a mining camp, but this ideologically shaped self-sufficient community. That's fascinating.
A deliberate political and social project as much as an economic one.
But obviously, this ambitious vision didn't last. What went wrong?
The mining just stopped being viable. It ceased in April 1998 after 53 years, Global coal prices fell, and extracting the remaining coal became harder and the quality lower. Just wasn't worth it economically.
So purely economics.
Mostly, but there was also a devastating event that accelerated things. The 1996 Russian plane crash at Oprevjelet.
I remember reading about that. Terrible.
Horrific.
Yeah.
141 people died, many connected to Pyramiden or the nearby Russian settlement, Barentsburg. It had a profound, shattering impact on the community and the company, Trust Arktikugol.
So that pushed them over the edge.
It seems so. Ultimately, the company didn't have the resources to keep both Pyramiden and Barentsburg going at the same level, and Pyramiden was the one chosen for closure.
The people just left.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Schools closed, families departed. The last permanent resident left in October 1998. It became a ghost town almost overnight.
And that's where the climate plays that weird role again.
Exactly. The extreme cold, which made life difficult, ended up preserving everything remarkably well. You find cups still on tables, newspapers open. It's like a snapshot, a time capsule of Soviet life in the Arctic.
A key lesson there seems to be the fragility of these single-industry towns in extreme places.
Absolutely. Economic vulnerability combined with a catastrophic event. It led to a rapid collapse.
But it's not totally empty now, right? There's been some limited return.
That's right. It sat largely empty until about 2007, 2008. Then explorers and tourists started getting interested, drawn by this unique, preserved ghost town vibe.
So the company saw an opportunity.
Trust Arktikugol did, yeah. They decided to revive it, but not for mining, for tourism.
So it's still mostly a ghost town, but with staff.
Yeah, a small, fluctuating population, maybe 15 to 30 people seasonally. Caretakers, tour guides, hotel staff. There was even that guy, Alexander Romanovsky, who famously returned in 2012 to live there year-round for a while.
What's life like for those few people there now?
In some ways, surprisingly normal. They have updated apartments, imported food. Internet access is limited, mostly just for messaging apps, but it keeps them connected. Free time involves films, reading, hiking, cycling around the abandoned town.
How do they even get there?
By boat in the summer, mainly from Longyearbyen, and snowmobile in the winter. Access is still pretty restricted.
And the buildings themselves are holding up?
Largely, yes, thanks to the cold. Many are built on stilts, which helps prevent the permafrost underneath from melting and destabilizing them.
So it's found this strange second life as a tourist spot. Its value now is its history, preserved by the very climate that challenged it.
A unique kind of repurposing, definitely.
Now, that crucial point about indigenous history again. Modern Pyramiden started in 1910.
And the critical thing for Svalbard, where Pyramiden is located, is that there is no indigenous population. Unlike the Canadian Arctic or Greenland, historical evidence suggests Paleo-Eskimos just didn't venture this far north.
So all human presence there is relatively recent and European.
Essentially, yes. Transient Europeans, whalers, trappers, explorers, scientists, miners. They came for resources or knowledge, but they weren't permanent settlers with millennia of history on the land.
So Svalbard's Hunan story is fundamentally different European initiated, driven by resource exploitation. No deep indigenous roots.
That's a fundamental contrast to somewhere like Ellesmere Island.
Okay, which leads us neatly to our third settlement, Longyearbyen, also in Svalbard on the main island, Spitsbergen. This is the big one, relatively speaking.
Right. It's the world's northernmost settlement with over 1,000 people, the capital of Svalbard, sitting around 78 degrees north.
Founded, interestingly, by an American.
Yes, John Longyear, a coal prospector back in 1906, brought about 500 miners initially. That's where the name comes from. And just like Pyramiden, its entire existence was originally based on coal mining.
It was a company town for most of its history.
Dominated by the state coal industry, which provided pretty much everything: jobs, housing, infrastructure, services.
But here's where Longyearbyen's path really diverges from Pyramiden's. It didn't become a ghost town. It changed.
Massively. It's undergone a really significant transformation, especially over the last couple of decades. It shifted its economic base away from just coal.
And that successful transition seems like a really powerful insight into Arctic survival, doesn't it? Resilience through change.
Absolutely. It's moved away from that single resource dependency and successfully diversified. It's reinvented itself as a major center for Arctic research, education, tourism, wilderness adventures, eco-cruises.
And this shift started earlier than in Pyramiden.
Well, the normalization process, moving away from being purely a company town, began back in the 1970s, so the foundation was laid earlier.
That proactive adaptation seems key. Diversification reduces vulnerability.
Critically important for long-term viability up there. Though interestingly, the sources note the last working coal mines closure was actually postponed recently until 2025.
Why was that?
Because the Russian invasion of Ukraine disrupted energy markets and pushed coal prices up again, it shows that even as it diversifies, those historical ties and external geopolitics can still have an impact.
Let's talk population. Much bigger than the others we've discussed.
Yeah, somewhere between 2,000 and 2,900 people, so it meets that threshold of being a proper town. And it's remarkably international.
Because of the Svalbard Treaty.
Exactly. That treaty gives citizens of signatory countries equal rights to live and work there, not just Norwegians. So you have large communities from Russia, Poland, Thailand, many others alongside the Norwegians.
And again, just to be clear, no indigenous population here either.
Correct. Same situation as Pyramiden. No indigenous history on Svalbard.
And a key difference from Alert, right? People choose to be here.
Overwhelmingly, yes. Except for maybe very young children, almost everyone in Longyearbyen is there because they want to be. It's a self-selected community, which tends to make it highly motivated.
What kind of jobs do people do now with this diversification?
All sorts. Tourism is huge. Guides, hotel staff, restaurant workers. Research is big, too, with the University Center and the Arctic Safety Center. Education, obviously, with the schools and kindergarten, local government roles, infrastructure maintenance.
But the coal company still has a presence.
It does. The state-owned company still provides a lot of the core infrastructure and employs a significant portion of the Norwegian population there, but it's no longer the dominant sole force it once was.
And they're tackling big challenges like food in innovative ways. You mentioned polar permaculture.
Yeah, it's fascinating. This local chef started it. They're actually growing fresh food locally, using hydroponics indoors during the polar night for things like microgreens, herbs, leafy greens, and then using soil outdoors in the brief summer.
That's incredible. Reducing reliance on imports.
Exactly. And they're also aiming to compost organic waste locally instead of shipping it out or dumping it at sea. It addresses both food security and environmental impact. They still import most things, of course, but it's a really significant step towards more local sustainability.
What's daily life like there? Still the polar tundra climate, the light cycles.
Yep. Polar tundra, though moderated slightly by the North Atlantic Current. You get the midnight sun from April to August, polar night from late October to mid-February. Lots of snow from November to March.
But the huge challenge overshadowing everything now is climate change.
It's massive. Longyearbyen is cited as the fastest warming city on Earth. The average annual temperature has gone up by something like 3.6 degrees Celsius since the baseline period of 1961-1990.
That's staggering, 2 to 3 times the global average.
It is, and it's having really direct, dangerous consequences.
How so? What does that rapid warming actually do?
It thaws the permafrost, the permanently frozen ground that much of the town is built on. This destabilizes buildings, especially those built on slopes. It increases the risk of avalanches and mudslides, which threaten homes and infrastructure.
And there have been actual incidents, fatalities.
Tragically, yes. There was a devastating avalanche in 2015 that killed 2 people and destroyed several houses. They are quite literally living on the front lines of climate change impacts.
Wow. Yet despite that, it sounds like a vibrant place.
It really does seem to be. They have all the services of a small town, often holding that northernmost title. Kindergartens, schools, the university branch, shops, restaurants, even a gourmet one. There's a strong social life, events, music, sports to combat the isolation and long winters.
And the polar bear reality is just normal life.
Part of the package. The sources mention it's mandatory for households to own a rifle if they plan on leaving the settlement boundaries. People sometimes leave doors unlocked in winter, apparently, just in case someone needs to make a hasty escape from a bear in town.
And sightings are increasing.
Reportedly, yes.
Yeah.
Possibly linked to changing sea ice conditions affecting the bear's hunting patterns.
So it's this incredible paradox. Climate change is an existential threat, but it's also driving innovation.
Seems that way. It's a catalyst for things like polar permaculture, exploring electric vehicles, setting renewable energy goals. Longyearbyen is actively trying to adapt, maybe even become a kind of model for Arctic adaptation globally, even with these immense challenges.
And again, just to round it off, the indigenous context.
Yeah.
None here. European-initiated history.
Right. Resource exploitation, now diversification and adaptation. But without that multi-millennial indigenous relationship to the land found elsewhere.
Thinking about these 3 modern places, Alert, Pyramiden, Longyearbyen, it really throws into sharp relief how different this is from the way humans historically survived in the Arctic.
It's a crucial contrast to make. Understanding the deep, adaptive traditions of indigenous peoples, like the Inuit in the Canadian Arctic, gives such valuable perspective on these modern approaches.
Traditional Inuit life, pre-contact, it was nomadic
Mhm.
and completely tuned into the environment.
Perfectly adapted. Through incredibly sophisticated hunting and fishing, they had this profound, intimate understanding of their environment, the seasons, the animal behaviors, the resources.
What were the key resources for survival?
Marine mammals were paramount whales, seals, walruses. They provided food, essential fats and oils for heat and light, and materials for absolutely everything else, skins for clothing and boats, bones and tusks for tools and art. Their hunting methods, using harpoons from kayaks or larger umiaks, were ingenious.
But they used other resources too.
Oh, yes. Fish like Arctic char, trout, cod, seabirds and their eggs, land animals like caribou and muskoxen, even things like fox or mussels in times of scarcity. Plants played a smaller dietary role, but were used.
And they were masters of resourcefulness, weren't they? Using every part.
Absolutely nothing wasted. They'd create food caches, storing meat under rocks for leaner times, hides meticulously prepared for clothing and shelter coverings, antlers and bones carved into essential tools, sinew used as thread, animal fat rendered for fuel in soapstone lamps, which provided both light and crucial warmth inside dwellings.
Their technology wasn't imported, it was made from the land itself.
Exactly. Tools from stone, bone, ivory, fishing lines and snares from tough whale baleen. They even built stone weirs, sort of like underwater fences to channel and trap fish in rivers.
And shelter. How did they manage that?
It varied seasonally. In summer, often tents made from poles and animal hides. In winter, more substantial dwellings like semi-underground pit houses, framed with scarce wood or whale bones, insulated with sod and snow and skins, warmed and lit by those crucial soapstone lamps. And of course, the igloo, an incredibly effective snow house for winter travel or temporary shelter.
The clothing must have been incredibly effective too.
Masterfully designed for the extreme cold. Often using a double-layer system, caribou skin was prized with the inner layer's fur turned inwards and the outer layer's fur facing outwards. This trapped air for amazing insulation. Garments were carefully tailored boots, kamiks, leggings, parkas with hoods, mittens,
And getting around.
skin-covered boats, the nimble kayak for hunting, the larger umiak for transport during the open water season, and in winter, the iconic wooden dog sled, the komatik, pulled by husky dogs for traveling across snow and sea ice.
So the fundamental insight here is this deep, holistic adaptation, living with the environment.
Precisely. A nomadic lifestyle, ingenious use of local resources for absolutely everything, complete self-sufficiency without external modern tech. It was built on generations of accumulated ecological knowledge. A sustainable coexistence, adapting to the environment, not trying to fundamentally change it.
Which is such a stark contrast to the models we see in Alert, Pyramiden, and Longyearbyen.
A completely different paradigm of Arctic habitation.
And that historical perspective really matters when looking at these modern sites.
It highlights the massive shift. Modern sites rely on imports, complex tech, global supply chains. Traditional life was about intense local knowledge and resource use, self-sufficiency.
Indigenous life was about adapting to the environment, this symbiotic relationship built over millennia.
Whereas modern settlements, especially those founded for strategic or industrial reasons, are often more about modifying or overcoming the environment, using technology and external support as a buffer.
Which creates different kinds of vulnerabilities, doesn't it?
Very different vulnerabilities. And it's worth circling back to that point about indigenous history present but discontinuous near Alert versus entirely absent in Svalbard. It shapes the whole narrative of human presence and relationship with the land in these places.
Okay, so bringing this all together, looking at Alert, Pyramiden, and Longyearbyen side by side, really shows this incredible range of human approaches to living at the absolute edge.
It really does. Alert is survival dictated by pure strategic imperative and technological capability, maintaining a presence no matter the cost or difficulty.
Pyramiden stands as this, well, haunting historical monument. Shows the limits of trying to impose a rigid industrial or ideological vision on that environment, especially when economics and tragedy strike. Now, ironically preserved by the very cold that challenged it.
And then Longyearbyen is this dynamic, ongoing experiment in adaptation, actively trying to diversify, innovate, and build a sustainable future while dealing with dramatic environmental changes, still deeply linked to the outside, but forging its own path.
And comparing these modern ways to that deep history of indigenous survival, really underlines the fundamental shift, doesn't it?
From living within and from the environment using local resources and knowledge.
To often living against it, or at least heavily mediated by external technology and global connections.
And that shift brings new challenges, new dependencies, especially as global forces, geopolitics, economics, and especially climate change reach even these remote places.
Longyearbyen's push for sustainability, trying to adapt to that rapid warming, it offers maybe a glimpse of what future Arctic adaptation might look like, but the challenges are just immense. Thinking about these incredibly remote communities, it really makes you wonder what truly defines survival or even thriving in the face of such extremes. Is it ultimately about conquering nature with technology?
Or is it about finding a different way, maybe a deeper way, to live in balance with it? What can you, listening to this, maybe learn from these different models as we all face our own environmental and societal challenges wherever we are?
It's definitely something to think about.